Today on Larry King Now, NFL insiders and women's advocates discuss the domestic abuse cases plaguing the NFL.
It used to be known as a family matter, but what we need to do now is bring that from underneath the table, put it up on the table. This is a national epidemic.
The NFL is an organization that up until now has not really had to deal with consequences, and so they don't know how to deal with consequences.
Roger Goodell has responded inappropriately in over 50 incidents of domestic violence that have come on his watch.
I think that's where the tipping point is going to be, the money and the money talking. We saw that with the NBA and the Clippers when Donald Sterling was eventually removed. It's not because the NBA just suddenly grew a conscience, it's because all of a sudden it was going to affect their bottom line.
Plus,
we have all these issues where women are constantly told, you are not as good as a man, you are not to be treated the same way. And why are we surprised when domestic violence goes unreported? We spend our entire lives telling women that they're not as good as men.
All next on Larry King Now. Welcome to another edition of Larry King Now, a very important program today. The domestic violence arrest rate for NFL players is a staggering 55.4%. And while the Ray Rice saga has captivated the nation, the attention is now moving on to accusations against other players. Does the NFL have a systemic problem? Today, my panel of experts is here to discuss this important topic. Tonya Brown is the youngest sister of Nicole Brown Simpson. She has a master's degree in psychology, has been a leading voice against domestic violence. She authored the book, Finding Peace Amid the Chaos, My Escape from Depression and Suicide. Chris Kluwe spent 7 years in the NFL as the most successful punter in Minnesota Viking history. And Andy Kamenetsky is a sports writer and radio host who appears frequently on NPR and ESPN Radio. Joining us later will be Terry ONeill, the president of the National Organization for Women. Chris, first, your former teammate, Adrian Peterson. What do you make of that kind of horrific story?
Yeah, well, AP was one of the last guys I ever expected to hear this about, because he was one of the most down-to-earth superstars that I'd ever met. But reality is reality, and this is something where there needs to be consequences to your actions. You need to understand that this is not acceptable. But
the consequences so far appeared non-apparent. One
right,
game.
Right, exactly. And not even that. It was more a 24-hour period where the Vikings kind of saw, oh, the Patriots just beat us up. We need to get our star running back out there, and really that's a bad look in this.
Do you think that's the reason?
I think that's the reason, because you could tell, there's no new facts in this case. Adrian's already said, this is what I did, here's why I did it. Now they're just waiting to see, okay, what's the punishment going to be from a legal perspective? So why are you waiting for due process in the court of law when you know everything that's already happened? There's nothing that's going to change there.
Why doesn't the league suspend them under their new 6-game rule?
Well, I don't know if this would necessarily fall under the new domestic abuse policy, and I believe Roger Goodell is actually having that looked into right now. But I think overall, it seems like everybody is chasing everybody else's tail. And it seems like everybody is just reacting right now, and they're going with a combination of public reaction and also what can they get away with. I mean, the timing of when these allegations came out against Adrian Peterson, when the news broke, was so close to the Ray Rice story that it seemed like the Vikings felt like they had to deactivate Adrian Peterson for, PR issues. But then a day later, after they lose to the Patriots, all of a sudden it seems like Adrian Peterson, they have enough information. They're going to let the legal system play through. As Chris said, there's nothing really new about this at this point.
Chris also said he's a nice guy and a great teammate. I guess the greatest example of domestic abuse in NFL history was your brother-in-law, O.J. Simpson,
Right.
who's in jail in Nevada, probably for the crime he committed against your sister.
Probably.
Not for. Yet O.J., anyone would tell you, he was captain of every team he ever served on, never acted violently on the field, never had a penalty, I think, of any kind of degree. Teammates went to him for advice, so we don't know the other side.
We don't. Domestic violence, only the victim knows the violence that goes on, because the violence lives behind the closed doors. None of us knew. Actually, Denise did know that Nicole was beaten. She even testified on it. But we didn't know what domestic violence was at that time. So this is really, it's a family matter, but what we need to do It used to be known as a family matter, but what we need to do now is bring that from underneath the table, put it up on the table, and make it a community and national epidemic. This is a national epidemic, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation. But OJ was a charmer. He was charismatic.
Oh, I knew him well.
Right? He was liked, and so you could just imagine that if you don't believe that he killed my sister, pictures proved, diaries proved that he beat my sister like a circus animal.
Ray Rice is another example of that.
Exactly. I'm sure there's tons of guys in the Ravens locker room.
He heads a group against bullying and speaks against bullying around the country. It's a dichotomy. I mean, it's a...
Yeah, it really is. And I think a lot of that goes to the fact that up until this point, the NFL really hasn't held anyone accountable for actions like this. It's very much, up until Ray Rice, the most frequent suspension was either 0 games or 1 game if you were convicted or charged with domestic violence. And they may have thought they were actually hitting Ray Rice hard by giving him a 2-game suspension.
Is the NFL as supreme as it is it above it? Does it think because of it's a billion-dollar business, it's the once-a-week pastime of America?
Well, I'll say this, the optics of it, if nothing else, makes it seem like they believe that. I mean, whether they actually think that in internal meetings or the way they've handled this, that they just feel like this is eventually going to bounce off them because they're Teflon, I can't speak to that, but I can speak to how it looks. And from the outset, they've botched the way I think any logical person would think, how should we handle this situation with Ray Rice? And they've, I think expressed what appears like indifference towards it, then it feels like they've been reactive towards it, and then it seems right now like they've just been making it up as they go.
What's puzzling to me is why did they need the second tape since you saw him pulling her out of the elevator unconscious? What did they think happened inside the elevator? Why did they need that tape?
I think, personally speaking, when I saw the video, it was a visceral reaction. And now I've mentioned it before. Now I know what it looked like when my sister was being beaten. It just reacted something. Did we need it? Sadly, majority rules, probably yes. But the words sometimes just aren't enough. Thank God cameras were in our courtroom, and thank God there was a camera in that elevator, because just like all communities across our nation, nobody would have believed that OJ beat my sister, and nobody would have believed that Ray Rice did this to his wife.
Up next, the president of the National Organization for Women, Terry ONeill, will join the panel. Don't go away. Joining our outstanding panel now is Terry ONeill. She's president of the National Organization for Women NOW. I want to read the quote, Terry, that you issued last week concerning the Ray Rice thing. You said the NFL has lost its way. It doesn't have a Ray Rice problem. It has a violence against women problem. The only workable solution is for Roger Goodell to resign and for his successor to appoint an independent investigator. Well, they've appointed an investigator, but he hasn't resigned. What do you make of what's happened since you made that statement, Terry?
Well, Larry, I think that our advocacy has had an impact. I think that the public's reaction has really had the biggest impact on Roger Goodell and his handling of this crisis. The investigator appointed is in no way independent. Mr. Mueller is a good man, but his law firm works for the NFL, and in his investigation, he is being supervised by 2 owners of NFL teams, one of whom has said publicly that Roger Goodell should not go. So I view that as an internal review. Nothing wrong with an internal review, but it is a far cry from the independent investigation that we've called for. We are continuing to insist that Roger Goodell is not the person who can credibly commit to making the kinds of changes at the NFL that need to be made, and so we are continuing to call for him to resign.
Why do you think he can't make a credible decision?
Frankly, Larry, every single thing he has done as the crisis gets worse and worse and worse, he takes the smallest step that he can possibly take in an effort simply to get this off the headlines, out of the public's view, so that he can go back to business as usual, right?
A lot of the public who stand up for Ray Rice, I'll ask this of you, Terry, and also of Tonya. Why did she marry him? Why did she stay with him?
Because they don't marry the monsters, right, Terry? They don't marry the monsters. They're charming.
You say they don't marry
They
them?
don't marry the monsters. The monsters eventually come out. It didn't start with what we saw in the elevator. This is very seductive. I've created the 7 sneaky characters of abuse to show the different types and the different levels of abuse. So they've lost the companion that they married. They lost that companion that they fell in love with. So what they do, what victims do, is that they kind of throw up the white towel and they're like, well, maybe if I just stay quiet, or maybe if I just do what they say and just keep my mouth shut, maybe then I won't get beaten. So what ends up happening, they take responsibility for their partner's behavior. So, and then eventually, once you've kind of gone through the cycle of violence, then we see what we saw with Ray Rice.
Is this an NFL problem, Terry, or a national problem?
Well, certainly intimate partner violence is a national problem. 1 in 3 women will experience some form of intimate partner violence in her lifetime in this country. It's really quite a shocking statistic, and that is true even though the level of violence against women has actually gone down over the 20 years since the Violence Against Women Act was passed. So we clearly have a problem. What makes the NFL different is 2 things. First of all, its leadership has over and over and over again responded exactly the wrong way to incidents of domestic violence within the NFL community. So that makes the NFL really having a problem right now. Secondly, the NFL produces great football. It is the largest, most powerful, and wealthiest sports organization in the United States. That gives it a special responsibility to respond appropriately to these incidents. But Roger Goodell has responded inappropriately in over 50 incidents of domestic violence that have come on his watch.
Chris, do you think it's the nature of the sport?
I don't think it's the nature of the sport simply because the NFL draws guys from such a diverse array of backgrounds, and it really is a cross-sampling of society.
But they beat each other up all week.
Yeah, but you also don't hear about the 95% of the guys who are good guys who don't do anything. You hear about the guys who do get in trouble, and that's what the NFL has to deal with because, like it or not, football players are role models. People look up to us and pattern their behavior after us. So if Roger Goodell, if the NFL players don't give a good pattern of behavior, people are going to follow that and use it to justify their own actions. That's why this needs to change.
Yeah, I would be cautious about labeling this an NFL problem in terms of it, raining down on all the players, because like Chris said, it's not fair to the players. The overwhelming majority, it seems like, do follow the law and don't get involved with something like this. But I absolutely agree that it's clear the NFL has a problem with handling it when it happens. They don't seem to be able to take the reins, take the leadership, take active steps when they really matter.
Terry, the NFL appointed its first woman executive today for the NFL. It seems, I know they do things wrong, but this seems a kind of laughable, right? That suddenly we have a woman in an executive post, first time in history in NFL headquarters. What do you make of that?
About 2 things. First of all, that may be part of the problem in NFL leadership is they don't have enough women executives. But secondly, frankly, although Cynthia Hogan is I have enormous respect for her, and I think that the 4 women that were announced, I believe yesterday, as advisors that are coming on as consultants and advisors to help the NFL respond appropriately to domestic violence, those are all good steps. But really, those are steps that are driven only because the public has not gone away. The public is still focusing on what is Roger Goodell really doing to respond to domestic violence. That's number one. He is continuing to treat this as if it is an inconvenient public relations problem for him. It is not. It is the real problem is the safety of the women in the NFL community who have been victims of domestic violence. The first question that he should have asked was, how do I keep her safe? Right. Nowhere have I found any evidence that he asked that question.
Before we lose you, Terry, do you think it's going to get better?
No, I think it's going to get worse. I think if Roger Goodell stays on, absolutely, there will be another domestic violence incident if Roger Goodell stays on as the commissioner. And I think that fans are being deprived of the sheer joy of watching NFL football because there's this dark cloud hanging over the organization.
Thank you, Terry.
All right, thank you.
Terry ONeill. Up next, the panel discusses the cyclical nature of domestic violence. We'll be right back. We're with Tonya Brown, Andy Kamenetsky, and Chris Kluwe discussing violence. Tanya, do you think there are many cases of violence not reported?
Oh, yeah. You know, and sadly, I'm not one to really follow statistics because statistics are only those that go reported. And sadly, a lot of domestic violence calls go under as, you know, disorderly conduct. We need to start calling it what it is. And domestic violence doesn't mean that you need to be married. It could be your teenage daughters. It could be your best friends.
It could be a 4-year-old boy.
It could be a 4-year-old boy.
Yep.
You know?
Do you think women would be less likely to come forward or more likely to come forward after the Rice incident?
I think it depends on how it's handled. I think if if society shows at large that it's beginning to start actually caring about women, then I think that more women will come forward and report these things. And I think one of the underlying problems that we have here isn't just a domestic violence problem. It's a problem that society does not value women. I mean, look at our political landscape. We have politicians trying to vote down equal pay for equal wages for women. We have, abortion and women's rights issues that are not being decided by women. They're being decided by men. We have domestic violence issues. We have all these issues where women are constantly told, you are not as good as a man. You are not to be treated the same way. And why are we surprised when domestic violence goes unreported? We spend our entire lives telling women that they're not as good as men.
Does Ray Rice have a case of double jeopardy? He's been suspended for the act. Now they see the film, which you didn't need to see to know that he did it.
No, you did not.
Does he have an appealable case?
I think he actually might. As reprehensible as what Ray Rice did to Janae Palmer Rice, the NFL initially gave him a 2-game suspension that they kept defending as the right decision. I mean, they propped themselves up as handling the Ray Rice situation with a lot of authority and swift action. Then the second part of this tape came out that, like you said, nobody really needed to see to figure out what was going to happen. Outside of the shocking visuals of it, there was nothing new or unexpected.
So he has a case, doesn't he?
Right. Well, I mean, I think he is going to claim that the NFL is making this up as they go. They're reacting to the public reaction to the cries that they weren't strong enough. But they're not even following the new domestic violence policy that they implemented as a result to the first reaction to the Ray Rice punishment.
You still a member of the union?
Yeah, I believe it is for life once you are a member of the NFLPA.
What does the union do?
The union's in a tough spot because, and this has always been one of my issues with the union, is that, yeah, the union has to defend the guys who get in trouble. They have to defend the rights of all players against the NFL. But at the same time, the union also has to remember that you are also representing every other football player out there. You're representing the guys who didn't do anything wrong. Right. You're representing the guys who stand for ethical behavior. And so you need to make sure that in the course of defending Ray Rice, because the union's going to have to defend Ray Rice, you need to make it clear that this is about the CBA. It's about making sure that the rights of players are protected, but that you do not expect Ray Rice to be back out on the field anytime soon because of what he did.
Did Nicole tell you that she was being beaten?
Nope. Nicole.
Why didn't she tell you? You're her sister.
Because there's a lot of shame behind it. There's a lot of embarrassment. They don't want to, victims of domestic violence don't really come out and say my husband or my partner is beating me. There's a lot of fear behind it. There's a lot of shame behind it. And there's also a lot of guilt behind it. If only the victim knows what the perpetrator is saying to her. So it's kind of like if you say anything, this is what you have coming. And if you try to leave me, I'll find you, I'll kill your cats, I'll damage anything that means anything to you. So, OJ threw Nicole's cat out on the freeway on her birthday. In hindsight, here Nicole always wore glasses even when it was dark outside, inside all the time. It's like, what was she hiding? When Reagan was in office, she had an invitation to go to a White House dinner. She didn't go because her lower back was hurting her. So why was her lower back hurting her? So in hindsight, I'm seeing all these things. I share her diary entries in my book. I share them in all my presentations because I want people to understand.
Did she tell her diary honestly?
Oh, yeah. And I only share the ones that are public. Reading the diaries that we collected, my sister was treated very, very violently.
You think it's a learned behavior?
Yes, absolutely.
You think so too?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think
cyclical.
Yeah,
Yes.
Society sets the standards,
Yeah.
and until we change that, it won't change.
When Adrian Peterson said his father did it to him, is that an excuse or a reason?
No, I think it's a reason, it's an explanation, but it's not an excuse. I mean, you can't, I think in 2014, or really ever, this should have never been okay. And I know regionally and culturally, generationally, I think for some people, religious background, this type of punishment is considered okay, and we would excuse it away. But the truth is, in my mind, it's always been child abuse. It's just been societally accepted child abuse.
Stuffing leaves in a kid's mouth is...
Yeah. It's again, as a society, we need to look at these actions and say, you know what, even if this is a cultural upbringing thing, ethically, is this right or wrong? And there is nothing ethical about hitting a 4-year-old child until he or she bleeds.
Right.
Why don't we hear more from owners?
That's what they have Roger Goodell for.
I mean, they pay the salaries of these.
Well, but it's also tricky, though, because some of these stars that have come up right now in these type of situations, Ray Rice, Adrian Peterson, Greg Hardy with the Carolina Panthers, Ray McDonald for the San Francisco 49ers, these are star players. And these are the type of players that owners want to try to maintain that relationship with, because they can equal wins and they can potentially equal championships. So it becomes this fine line between trying to do what's best for your team in the win column, but still, at the very least, try to maintain some type of appearance of moral authority.
Coming up next, can abusers be rehabilitated? We'll be right back. Michael Vick treated dogs terribly, and that's the way he grew up around it.
Right.
He seems to be completely rehabilitated. He tours the country for dog organizations. He's certainly back in the NFL. Can abusers be rehabilitated?
Absolutely, and I'm a pit bull lover, and so when I'll confess, when Vick did this, I was outraged, because my poor little Kane, I couldn't even imagine that being done on him. But there are better treatment programs, and what people need to understand, that it's like an alcoholic. I have a choice to pick up that drink and actually consume it. Or I can walk away and do some mindfulness, or do just some deep breathing, anything I can do to prevent that. But it takes work. You can't just go to a batter's treatment program and put the information under your bed and hope it sinks in.
Do you think because Rice and Peterson are so popular is the reason players seem to speak up for them?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons, is that both Adrian Peterson and Ray Rice up until this point were kind of figureheads of the NFL. They were examples of what's good about the NFL, and so a lot of people still have trouble believing the fact that they could have done these things. Now, the evidence is there. They did do these things. They need to face the consequences for doing these things, but at the end of the day, a far better lesson than just kicking them out of the league will be rehabilitation and then holding them up as role models, just like Michael Vick, so that people can look at that behavior and say, you know what, if they changed, I can change too.
In fairness, too, to a lot of players in the NFL, when that second video came out, you saw players on Twitter reacting, saying this punishment was a joke. The initial 2-game suspension, that was horrific. We can't have that in our league. So not everybody was standing up for Ray Rice at all times.
Right. Yeah. Even Steve Young was very vocal. He says zero tolerance.
Yep.
Zero. And that's what needs to happen. These guys who commit these crimes, they could turn this around right now and really make a difference. This is predominantly a male issue. I've spoken to female battery treatment programs, but predominantly this is a male issue.
Well, there are females who batter men,
Absolutely.
too, but men never report it because they're ashamed.
Exactly, exactly. So collectively, the guys who are doing this can turn it around, start creating social change, right, that Chris keeps talking about, and make a difference and say, hey guys, this isn't right. Look what happened to me.
How about sponsors and money? Now, when the general manager of the Vikings made that statement, which was kind of ridiculous, he had the Radisson Hotel sign behind him, and they just canceled their advertising.
Well, if you're Radisson, do you want your brand, your name, to be in full view of a team discussing an issue where their star player beat his 4-year-old son? Even if in the mind of that player, this was about discipline from a parent to a child. I love my child. It's still an ugly situation. And ultimately, Larry, I think that's where the tipping point is going to be, the money and the money talking. We saw that with the NBA and the Clippers when Donald Sterling was eventually removed. It's not because the NBA just suddenly grew a conscience. It's because all of a sudden it was going to affect their bottom line.
Right.
Terry ONeill says it's going to get worse. You think so?
I think it probably will, just because the NFL is an organization that up until now has not really had to deal with consequences, and so they don't know how to deal with consequences. They've always been able to push stuff under the rug and kind of sweep it aside, and now they're seeing that public opinion really is almost united on this issue, that we want better from our game. We don't want to have to worry about child abusers and domestic violence, and we don't want to think about these issues when we're watching football because we want to watch a game.
Right.
And so let's fix these issues. Let's make it so that this doesn't happen again.
What they're in now is Sunday everyone watches the games, and Monday goes back to this talk.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So this is it's not going away.
It's not going away. And you know what? Thank God it's not going away. You know, every time that something like this happens, sadly, it gives all of us advocates and ones with voices to start talking about domestic violence, keeping it in. Anytime that there's any news with OJ or anything on domestic violence, my sister Denise and I, we try to get as much publicity as we can because we need to keep this conversation alive.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to our guests, Tonya Brown, Chris Kluwe and Andy Kamenetsky, and Terry ONeill. And remember, you can find me on Twitter @KingsThings.